You're listening to Let's Talk Pricing, your connection to the voices, stories, and strategies shaping the pricing world. Each episode, we go beyond theory into the practical, timely conversations that help you lead with confidence and drive results. Let's start the show.
Very good day, everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk Pricing, the podcast from the Professional Pricing Society. My name is Kevin from PPS, and today we are going to talk about some ideas that can shape pricing leadership. And I know from talking with pricing professionals around the globe that a lot of us sometimes are overly concerned with the analytical side, with the numerical side of everything that we talk about, whether it's margins, algorithms, optimization, or what have you there. But as many of us know, and as many pricing leaders discover, some of the most powerful forces that shape what we do as pricing leaders sometimes have very little or nothing to do with numbers themselves. Really, what we have to deal with is people influencing decisions, negotiations, and things like that. And with all of that, I'm very happy to introduce our guest today for the Let's Talk Pricing podcast. Today, we're going to be talking with Jenny Miller. Jenny is the founder and CEO of Untapped Pricing, and she is the co-author of a book called The Pricing Sprint, which will be published in May of 2026 by Bloomsbury. And Jenny's background includes spending a decade at eBay, where she led pricing analytics and strategy, across the European businesses. And she drove major transformations across 11 European markets. And today, Jenny works with leadership teams to design pricing strategies. And she has a lot of expertise in customer value and behavioral science, and uses that to help organizations understand how human behavior shapes pricing decisions. So Jenny, welcome. Very glad you're here with us today on the Let's Talk Pricing podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
And also, Jenny, one more thing. We are very, very excited that in the PPS Profitable 2006 conference coming up in Chicago, that you are going to join us there, and you're going to deliver a presentation entitled Everything But the Price: How Human Behavior Shapes Pricing Decisions. So we're looking forward to some great information there. And I have a few questions for you, because this is an area that I find fascinating and that I need to learn a lot more about. So before we dive into some of the subjects that we're talking about, before we dive into your book, tell us a little bit about your journey in pricing, what led you to start Untapped Pricing, and how your book came about.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kevin. So my journey into pricing started during those 10 years with eBay, where, as you said, I held a number of roles across pricing analytics and pricing strategy for their $26 billion European business. And that really opened my eyes to the power of pricing, its ability to impact financial performance, but also to shape human behavior in fascinating ways. And at eBay, we could see that really clearly. So on the seller side, even the difference between a free listing and a 1 penny or 1 cent listing fee could dramatically change how people behaved. So it could influence whether they listed an item at all, when they listed it, and whether they chose to offer it as an auction or fixed price. And then on the buyer side, auctions were also a constant reminder that price isn't very rational. So in an auction, people are bidding on against each other to win an item. And very often buyers would end up paying far more than they would have paid to buy the exact same item at a fixed price. So I think people became focused on that, on winning the auction, right? And that competitive instinct kicked in. And that psychology was very powerful.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And psychology definitely has a big part to play in a lot of the things that we as pricing professionals do. And of course, you mentioned a couple very insightful things there. One of them that I really like, and I've had this discussion with other people, is that the biggest price increase in the world is going from free to 1 cent. That is huge. That is far bigger than we would think. And of course, there are lots of examples in the pricing literature. I'm thinking about some of the things that Kahneman and Tversky and others have done, where we show that going from free to any nominal value just in the gray area up here within our brains is a huge, huge thing and can be much, much larger than we think about. And when I think of eBay as a business being a big part of your history there, the instant information that you get from both sides must have been fascinating as well. So, amongst the other things that you talked about, what else did you learn from your experience at eBay about pricing at scale and about human behavior and about buyers and sellers?
Yeah, well, we were pricing across 11 different markets. So that was, you have different customer behaviors, different competitor pressures, multiple internal teams involved in those pricing decisions. And I think those internal teams actually added another dimension of human behavior to navigate. So as they brought their own assumptions and biases. So at pricing at scale like that, so we were operating a $26 billion business in Europe. So even small pricing changes can have a huge impact. So a success really meant aligning the organization around the value that we were creating for customers, recognizing where that value differed across markets or customer groups, and learning through experiments where that was possible.
Absolutely. I imagine that there were a lot of great experiments. You, of course, had access to a lot of data on both sides, which is unusual for pricing people sometimes to see kind of both sides of the equation working jointly together at one point. So I would imagine that's quite an experience. And also, you mentioned the 11 different markets that you covered that are also part of your experience there. And I know I get that question from people who have either EMEA or APAC in their job titles. Me as an American, they ask me, how is pricing different in Europe, in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America versus how it is in North America. And that's one thing that I always try to point out is we in my part of the world might think of Asia as one huge conglomerate or Europe as a slightly smaller conglomerate or something like that. But there are foreign exchange differences, there are cultural differences, of course, there are language differences, there are different ways of doing business when you cross some of those borders. So, in some ways, experience for those of us who have EMEA or APAC in our job titles means that they have that extra dimension that a lot of us here in the United States might not even really understand to that extent unless we have a lot of international duties as well. So I think that that's a great way to learn a lot about buyers and sellers and human behavior across a spectrum there. So, Jenny, another question for you. A lot of companies will approach pricing as kind of a technical, analytical exercise. But your work, as I know, and as you've mentioned today, often focuses on the human side, the so-called soft skills, and the things that going on with behavioral economics, with psychology, and much more. A lot of us are unable to make the leap from one to the other. So how would you ascribe to pricing professionals that they need to make sure that they are also experts on that other side of the equation, on the human side of pricing? So why is the human side of pricing so important?
Yeah. So the customer does not experience your price logically. So they experience it through perception, comparison, and an emotion. So they're asking themselves questions like, does this feel fair? Is it worth it? How does it compare with alternatives? So I think if you ignore the human side of pricing, you're missing a huge part of what actually drives and shifts willingness to pay.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for the explanations there. And a lot of us think that we are perfectly rational, logical human beings, but there is, with every human being on the planet, I'm certain, a such thing as an impulse buy, which would counteract that thought right off the top of our heads. So definitely agree with that, that we are not as logical as we think that we are sometimes. Obviously, things come into play, externalities come into play, comparisons come into play, reference prices, and much, much more there to perhaps make us realize that we are not as 100% logical as we all think that we are sometimes. And I'm really looking forward to your book, The Pricing Sprint. And I want to also give a little notice to your co-author, Ann Padley, who works with you at Untapped Pricing. So tell us a little bit about Ann and tell us a little bit about what inspired you and her to write this book.
Great. So Anne and I both lead pricing work at Untapped Pricing, where we help organizations to design and implement pricing strategies that better reflect that value that they're creating. So Anne is a strategist and an educator with really deep expertise in human-centered design and behavioral pricing. So she's got a real talent for helping organizations navigate those complex decisions and bringing teams together and facilitating them around price, which I think is often where the real challenge lies. So over the years, we've taken many leadership teams through what we call a pricing sprint, which is a structured process for rethinking pricing decisions. When we began to notice the same challenges and the same breakthrough moments appearing again and again across very different organizations. And so that's what really inspired us to write The Pricing Sprint, published by Bloomsbury, as you mentioned, to capture this methodology we've honed and refined over the years to really help companies design, test, and improve their pricing and be as aware as they can be of that psychological side.
Terrific. Yeah. And I'm really looking forward to your book, which is coming out in May. So everyone, please make sure to check out Jenny and Ann's book there, The Pricing Sprint, of course. And Jenny, one of the themes of your book is about how we turn pricing into a collaborative, evidence-driven process rather than something that's done by one pricing team in a so-called ivory tower somewhere. So what does that look like in practice?
Yeah, so as you say, in many organizations, pricing decisions can sit with one team. But as we know, pricing touches almost every part of the business. So siloed thinking causes teams to pull in different directions. So we might have the product team really focused on features and finances focused on margins. Sales is worried about losing deals and marketing is thinking about positioning. So everyone's looking at the same problem from a different angle. And I think the resulting proposition can get quite disjointed, therefore, for the customer. So, what tends to break down that or break that deadlock, if you like, is bringing those different perspectives together and grounding the conversation in evidence. We all see a lot of strong opinions in pricing, right? But actually, those opinions are really important. So we want to convene those opinions and speak to customers, test our assumptions, turn those opinions into hypotheses to test, and work through trade-offs as a team. So it's that collaborative and evidence-led process that really sits at the heart of the pricing sprint.
Of course. And that's also what makes pricing such a challenging opportunity for a lot of us there is that ability when we're doing it well, where we can be at the center of product marketing, product management, sales, finance, operations, and all of these other groups, different kind of goals, different aims, but we have to be at the center of it and make sure that we work with everyone in order to move the organization forward. So thank you very much. Appreciate that. And Jenny, we are due for a quick break here, but everyone, please stay tuned to the Let's Talk Pricing podcast. We'll be back with much more from Jenny Miller. Thank you so much.
Hey, this is Tracy Dent from Holden Advisors. I'm the host of a podcast called If Prices Could Talk. On our show, we sit down with CEOs and pricing leaders to dive into what's working, what's changing, and how to build and sustain pricing power in today's markets. We get into tactical approaches to value-based pricing and ways to equip sales to defend those prices and negotiate with backbone. I hope you join us. Find us by searching If Prices Could Talk on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify.
All right, everyone. Welcome back to the Let's Talk Pricing podcast. Today, we are talking with Jenny Miller about everything but the price, how human behavior shapes pricing decisions. Jenny and her partner have a wonderful book coming out in a couple months called The Pricing Sprint. And of course, we are very much looking forward to seeing Jenny deliver a great presentation at PPS Profitable coming up in April in Chicago. So Jenny, your book outlines a step-by-step method for designing, testing, and optimizing pricing processes. This is very hard for a lot of companies. Why do companies struggle when they try to approach pricing in such a structured way?
I think a big part of it comes back to that siloed thinking we were talking about before the break. So pricing sits at that intersection of product, sales, marketing, finance. Everyone's got a different perspective, but there's often no clear process for bringing those perspectives together. So the pricing sprint gives teams that structured way to do this, to explore value, test assumptions, and move through to confident pricing decisions with alignment and buy-in from across the organization. One team recently told us that historically pricing had simply been set by a previous leader and rolled out across the organization. But when they went through a pricing sprint with us, it was the first time that people from across the business felt like they had a voice in shaping the pricing strategy. And that sense of shared ownership was actually what then really unlocked the collaboration afterwards.
Understood. And that's another way when we talk about the human side of pricing, when people feel that they have that agency and that their opinions matter, then sometimes you can get some great surprising insights from people who may have not publicly been excluded, but may have been dissuaded from giving their opinions previously. So certainly understand that. And I've always said that the biggest pricing decision maker in business history has been one person's gut reaction to something without any art or without any science behind it. And of course, if we can get some collaborative efforts, if we can get some data involved with there, if we can understand the human side of what's going on there, then that's going to lead for better results for our organizations. And speaking about better results, in your book, you suggest that businesses can leave millions on the table because they misunderstand their customers and what their customers value. So since we all think that we're in business and we deal with our customers all of the time, where does this gap come from and why does it exist? Why are we not addressing what our customers truly value in an optimal way?
I think one of the biggest reasons is that companies tend to think about value from the inside out. So they focus on the features they've built, the effort involved, or perhaps the costs that they've incurred. But customers think about value very differently. They care about the outcomes that they get. I remember one project recently where the client team thought that price was the biggest barrier to sales. But then when we interviewed their customers, they'd say things like, honestly, if this saves me a few hours every week, it's an absolute bargain. So that gap between what the company thinks customers value and what customers actually value is where a lot of money then gets left on the table.
Of course, there's always that disconnect sometimes between what we would consider to be our features and what our customer would consider to be his or her or their benefits. So that makes sense. And inside out thinking is another one of these things that as human beings, that's kind of our first go to. So sometimes we have to get away from that and think that, hey, value is only perceived from the customer, it's the customer's perception. Really, what we think of the value may have very little or nothing to do with what the customer thinks that is really valuable about our products and services. So that is a challenge to overcome for us as human beings and dealing with human nature. And of course, when we talk about human nature, we've talked about this a little bit before, but psychology has a very big part to play in that. Behavioral economics, behavioral pricing. And I know that you are an expert in this, and also the insights from eBay being on both sides of the equation at the same time in real time, I'm sure gave you a lot of good insights there as well. So, with behavioral science, with a human centered design shaping our pricing strategies, how can we better understand human behavior to think about the way that companies think about their own prices and the way that our customers think about the prices that we charge?
Um, so behavioral science reminds us that people do not evaluate price in a rational way. And the way a price is presented can have such a huge impact on how people perceive it and whether they then decide to buy. So the idea is central to what Richard Thaler and Kassenstein called nudge theory, which we now apply in our work with clients. So small design changes in how prices are presented can generate surprisingly powerful results. So for some clients, we've driven as much revenue upside from changing how the price is presented as from changing the price itself. So perhaps a couple of examples to bring this to life. So instead of showing a single price, which invites that binary decision of, do you want this or not? You might present 3 options at different price points. And that simply shifts, that simple shift moves the decision to, which option should I choose? What's right for me? And then it also applies to how prices are displayed. So whether you're publishing prices online or you're sharing proposals with a pricing page within it, the way that a price is written, the font size, what surrounds it on the page, and how the options are framed relative to each other can all influence price perception and conversion.
Absolutely. And a lot of us know this internally, but our colleagues and our coworkers probably think, oh, the pricing team, the pricing department puts a price on something and that's it. Not even thinking about these other things that you mentioned about how it's presented, about the fact that once you give people options, that sometimes that can change the binary decision, as you described it, from yes or no, buy or no buy, to perhaps which one, or perhaps lead to questions about the differences between the various options there, which can also lead to some further actions there. And I know that we have to also be wary of avoiding the paradox of choice where we can give too many options. So it seems in the pricing literature that there might be a sweet spot amongst how many choices that we give our customers in order not to overwhelm them, but also to give them a little bit of a choice there. So there's a lot that goes on behind saying, oh, 50 euros and let's move on.
Yeah, that's it. And Kevin, I've seen a lot of pricing pages and a lot of proposals, and it's often just the afterthoughts, the very dry numeric page, but it's the one that your customers skip to first. And to your point about too many choices are almost as bad as no choices, I encourage people to think about the cognitive load of the page itself or the information itself. So your prices should be really quick and easy to understand. We want to tap into that systems one thinking and not make people have to analyze it too much. Otherwise, they'll either hesitate or they'll defer to the cheapest option, and we don't want either of those.
Absolutely. And yes, thank you for bringing the behavioral economics and the psychology back with system one versus system two thinking, which is very, very important to us as human beings and for pricing professionals in particular, because that is a great way to kind of delineate what might be a good way of presenting options to our marketplace, to our customer base, versus something that might cause a little consternation and might cause problems, which leads to delays. And we all know that speed is undefeated. So if we can make a kind of situation where it is easy for our customer to make decisions, then of course that is a big advantage that we can have over our competitors and over some of our other things going on within our marketplace as well. So, Jenny, thank you very much for your insights. We are due for another break, but everyone, please stay with us. The Let's Talk Pricing podcast with Jenny Miller. We'll be right back. Thank you so much.
Are you ready to sharpen your pricing edge? Join the Professional Pricing Society at Profitable 2026, April 28th through May 1st in Chicago, Illinois. 4 days of workshops, keynotes, and real conversations with your pricing peers from around the world. This year also features the CPP Fast Track, where you can earn all 6 required CPP credits in just 4 days and leave exam ready for the Certified Pricing Professional designation, a credential that can define the next stage of your pricing career. Register now at pricingSociety.com/PPSCHI26 and lock in early bird pricing before March 27th.
Very good day, everyone, and welcome back. Kevin Mitchell from PPS here. Welcome back to the Let's Talk Pricing podcast. We are talking with Jenny Miller today, and we are talking about everything but the price, how human behavior shapes pricing decisions. Of course, we are very, very much looking forward to Jenny's presentation with her partner, Ann Padley, at the PPS Profitable 26 conference in Chicago. And also, we are really, really looking forward to Jenny's book, which is coming out in May of 2026, called The Pricing Sprint. So make sure to check that out as well. And Jenny, a question for you here. Looking ahead, how do you think pricing teams will need to evolve as companies become more data-centric with all of the tools that are out there now? And also, since we as customers have evolved also, where now we think that everything should be tailored just for our needs. So we have more data on one side, but our customers want things delivered specifically, especially just for them. So how will pricing teams evolve to face these challenges?
I think pricing teams will become increasingly customer-centered and evidence-led. Companies now have more data than ever before, but data on its own doesn't create better pricing decisions. So what really matters is combining that data with a deep understanding of customer value and behavior. So the role of pricing teams is increasingly to connect those dots across an organization, bring the data together, the customer insight and the commercial strategy to help companies design pricing that really reflects the value that they create.
Of course, and thank you so much. And when we talk about data and combining this with the customer insights, we always talk about pricing being both an art and a science. And a lot of us who are pricing professionals probably feel a lot more comfortable with the science part of it. I would imagine that I would say most of us probably would lean more on the analytical side. But of course, as you've demonstrated, the art side, the so-called soft skills, understanding human behavior, outside in versus inside out thinking, understanding that value really only exists if it's perceived by the customer. How can we as pricing professionals make the leap to become more human-centered and to take all of these things into account, as well as just the numbers and the Greek letters and the mathematics of the situation?
Yes, we need to be multi-talented, don't we? I think it's back to really that customer-led thinking. So matching pricing decisions to how customers think, I think that also plays back to the presentation of prices and choices. So often businesses are listing out individual features or components, and because that reflects how the product's built internally, but it doesn't match how the customer thinks. So one little phrase that I find myself using quite a lot that might resonate is to price the cake, not the ingredients. Customers are not buying the flour, the eggs, and the sugar from you. They want to buy the finished cake or the outcome it delivers. So companies and pricing teams need to design pricing and price presentation around the outcome or the solution rather than the individual parts. And I think that then shifts the conversation away from cost and towards value.
I like how you discuss the outcome as the end result of the situation there. And it's not the flour, the milk, the sugar, the butter, the eggs. And even with the cake, sometimes it's when you unveil the birthday cake and see people's surprises. It's the outcome that everyone gets to celebrate and things like that. So there's a lot that goes into it. And again, we can't think of that in terms of flour and sugar. We have to think of that in terms of, hey, when your family gets together and this beautiful cake is presented, or this wedding cake is the center of the celebration for one of the most important days of your life, then of course that is a very human perceived value that would go far beyond the raw ingredients there. So very much like your analogy where we're going to price the cake and not the raw ingredients of it there. That's a great description of what a lot of us should be aiming to do in our daily jobs there. So Jenny, thank you so much for your time with us today on the Let's Talk Pricing podcast. And I want to remind everyone that Jenny's book with Ann Padley is coming out in May of 2026. So look for the Pricing Sprint to be published by Bloomsbury. And also we look forward to seeing you at PPS Profitable 26 in Chicago coming up at the end of April as well. So looking forward to seeing you there. But thank you so much for your time with us. And Jenny, please tell us how our folks can best get in touch with you if they want more information on these topics.
Fantastic. Well, hey, thank you for having me, Kevin. And Anne and I look forward to seeing you and the rest of the team in Chicago. So if you'd like more information, please head to untappedpricing.co.uk. for more information. And the Pricing Sprint is available for pre-order on Amazon already, so you can take a look at that.
All right. So everyone make sure to order the Pricing Sprint on Amazon. Make sure to reach out to Jenny, and also make sure to take advantage of Jenny's presentation with us coming up very soon. So Jenny, thanks again for your insights. Learned a lot and appreciate that you were able to use your unique experience from eBay when you talked about a 26 billion company and 11 different markets across Europe there in order to move us forward in some of these new human-centric ways of thinking about pricing. So thank you so much for that. And everyone, thanks for joining us for the Let's Talk Pricing podcast. We will have more information and more great insights from pricing leaders to come. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good day.